On February 23, 1945, atop Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima, Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto crouched inside a concrete bunker, his hands trembling as he wrote a sentence that would have meant immediate execution if any superior ever saw it. The Marines are not human. They do not fall the way other enemies fall. Everything we were taught about Americans being weak was a lie. What he saw through the firing slit had shattered years of indoctrination. 6 Marines advanced toward a position through a storm of machine gun fire. 3 were cut down instantly, yet the remaining men continued their charge. When his comrades began throwing grenades in rapid volleys, one Marine hurled himself onto a grenade, absorbing the blast to shield the men behind him, and despite horrific wounds, kept fighting until he could no longer lift his weapon. Within minutes, the survivors overran the position. Iwo Jima held 21,000 Japanese defenders entrenched in 18 kilometers of tunnels and bunkers. They had been taught that American collapsed under pressure, but the truth burned away every illusion the Imperial staff had constructed. On Iwo Jima, the miscalculation was not written on paper. It was written in flesh. In just 36 days, 26,000 Marines became casualties. 7,000 were killed. Yet Japanese confidence had begun cracking 3 years earlier in their first true confrontation with the U.S. Marines. In August 1942, on Guadalcanal, Sergeant Hideo Takahashi, a veteran of the China Front, wrote after the first week of fighting, "The Americans who landed are not like anyone we have ever fought. They do not retreat when surrounded. They do not surrender even when hopeless. Stranger still, they fight the same at night as they do in the day, as if darkness strengthens them instead of frightening them." Guadalcanal was the first island battle where the Imperial Army found itself on the defensive. Japanese officers had believed they could crush the inexperienced Americans easily. Intelligence reports describe the Marine Corps as elite in name, but essentially products of a soft democratic society incapable of hardship. All of these assumptions were shattered within days of the landing. On August 20th, Lieutenant Shigeru Fukui was ordered to recapture Henderson Field during a night assault. His 200 men had defeated enemies several times their number in China. They expected to cut through American lines easily, confident that darkness would terrify the Marines. They advanced with textbook precision. Instead, they entered a slaughterhouse. The Marines had prepared interlocking fields of fire and used the night as a weapon. Fukui was stunned to see Marines launching counterattacks in darkness rather than cowering defensively as Japanese intelligence had predicted. He was killed 3 days later, but his diary survived. In it he wrote, "They attack us in the night. That is supposed to be our tactic. They pass through jungle we thought impassable. They kill silently and disappear. At dawn, we had fewer than 90 men left. The Americans lost 12. The pattern repeated across the Solomon Islands, accustomed to their bonsai charges breaking enemy morale. Japanese soldiers were shocked to see Marines holding firm and fighting with bayonets and knives until ammunition was gone." 4 months later, during the evacuation from Guadalcanal, Private Kenji Matsumoto wrote, "We were taught that Americans would never sacrifice for their comrades, but I saw a Marine gunner keep firing after both legs were blown off until he was stabbed to death, and his assistant took the gun and continued shooting. We lost 40 men that night." Imperial analysts began studying why Marines fought with such frightening endurance. Yamamoto first heard about Marine training in a 1943 briefing. An officer who had interrogated POWs explained with disbelief, "Marine recruit training would be considered abuse in any civilized army. Recruits are broken down mentally and physically, then rebuilt into something entirely different. They are taught never to surrender and to fight until their body cannot function." It sounded like Bushido, but colder, more systematic, powered by an industrial-age nation capable of mass-producing not just weapons, but warriors. Tarawa destroyed another illusion. Major General Keiji Shibasaki's 4,500 defenders believed their positions impregnable. Yet in 76 hours, they were annihilated by the 2nd Marine Division. Among the 17 survivors was Tadashi Ogawa, who said, "The first wave died in the water, the second died on the sand. The third reached our bunkers with flamethrowers and explosives. They stopped only when either we were dead or they were. The math was simple. In 76 hours, 6,400 men died. But the Marines who survived showed they would take their objective no matter the cost. Captured documents slowly acknowledged Marine characteristics: shock troops, fanatical commitment to objectives, refusal to withdraw, units fighting at full capacity until physically destroyed. Surviving Japanese officers described their reaction as confusion mixed with fear. They could not understand why Marines accepted losses that no other army would tolerate. Captain Yoshiro Kobayashi wrote, "The U.S. Army fights steadily and orderly. The Marines are different. They advance regardless of casualties. Their casualty rates would break any other unit. Yet they treat them as normal. Speed and firepower combine to kill with unprecedented efficiency." On Peleliu, Colonel Kunio Nakagawa expected the Americans to halt after landing. Instead, the Marines fought almost continuously, from dawn until nightfall. Nakagawa wrote, "I believe the enemy would act rationally, but they do not act according to any rationality I understand. They commit themselves fully, without regard for cost." To Japanese officers, Marine tactics seemed suicidal, yet devastatingly effective. Matsumoto described a platoon assaulting a ridge. 30 seconds of reconnaissance, then an attack. 7 men fell in 20 seconds, yet the survivors cleared 3 bunkers in 4 minutes using explosives. This was not improvisation. It was institutional doctrine, trading acceptable losses for speed. This alone shattered Japanese military worldview. Despite propaganda, officers knew life was finite, but Marines treated death as a cost of doing business. Major Yoshitaka Hori on Iwo Jima wrote, "We inflicted over 20,000 casualties in 36 days, enough to break any army, but the Marines did not weaken. They were constantly reinforced. Their supply and replacement speed exceeded our ability to kill them. Mathematics, not courage, decided our defeat." Captured documents on Saipan expose America's logistical superiority. Lieutenant Toshio Yamamoto observed Marines eating hot meals 3 days after landing, receiving ammunition by truck, getting medical care in tents, and rotating rest schedules. He saw ammo piles larger than his regiment's entire reserves, field kitchens cooking hot food, mobile showers, and laundry stations. He wrote, "In the fiercest battle, they live better than we do in garrison. We cannot win against such an enemy." These observations made clear that the Japanese were not facing an army. They were facing a nation's industrial power. Marines could accept high casualties because replacements were endless. Every Japanese casualty was permanent. The longer the fight lasted, the weaker Japan became, and the stronger the Marines grew. Peleliu and Iwo Jima confirmed this. Japanese defenses were ferocious, but could not change outcomes. General Tadamaki Kuribayashi understood this when the Iwo Jima landings began. He knew he could not win, and could only delay the Americans. He wrote to his wife, "This is a mathematical problem with one answer. The Marines will attack until we are all dead." He was right. 70,000 Marines landed. 26,000 became casualties, and the 21,000 Japanese defenders left barely 1,000 survivors. The Marines paid a horrific price, but achieved every objective. Kuribayashi's final message stated, "No defense can withstand this combination: willingness to accept losses that would break any other army, overwhelming firepower, fast decentralized leadership, and a will that never stops attacking." This was the truth Japanese soldiers most feared. Black smoke rose over the northern ridges of Saipan, filling the air with ash, gunpowder, and the smell of decay. On the 5th day after battle, a group of captured Japanese soldiers sat silently behind a makeshift fence. To their left stretched a massive logistics zone stacked with thousands of ammunition crates. To their right, a naval water purification unit pumped fresh water for Marines preparing to return to the front. The prisoners watched Marines fill their canteens with ice water, passing them down a line of men with mechanical precision, showing no hesitation, as if they had not just fought for days. The scene pierced the Japanese prisoners' spirits. To them, supplies were luxuries, water a blessing, medical care unreachable. Yet the Americans lived in a state resembling normal life in the middle of hell. One prisoner, Yukichi Okamoto murmured, "They did not come to fight in this war. They brought their entire country with them." Treasonous to Japanese officers, but obvious to the men who had lived the truth. When Marines reorganized for the next attack, Japanese prisoners were forced to watch engineers paving metal roads between craters, trucks shuttling supplies, cranes lifting crates, tanks repaired in minutes. For the first time, Japanese soldiers realized American victory did not rely on heroism. It relied on irresistible industrial power. Every act of Japanese bravery faded into irrelevance against a system so vast it absorbed sacrifice without noticing. Some POWs were assigned to carry ammunition on the beach. Each crate reminded them painfully that the shells inside could sustain a Japanese battalion for a week. Japan had fought since 1937 on scarcity, improvisation, and desperation. America fought by drowning enemies in abundance. Marine officers held complicated feelings toward these prisoners. They did not hate them. Many Marines had read captured documents revealing Japanese soldiers lived as control tools from birth to death, serving a state that valued them as expendable. They were not autonomous participants in the war. They were instruments. Prisoners also saw how Americans treated their dead. Marines paused, bowed their heads, touched dog tags, folded flags, held vigils. Then they returned to the fight, not from fear, but from a sense of responsibility. This responsibility was nothing like Bushido. It was not driven by shame or punishment, but by a principle rooted in a structured system. Japanese soldiers could not understand it. Their duty came from compulsion and threat, not choice. They began asking themselves a forbidden question: why do men from a rich country fight harder than we do? The confusion spread from Saipan to Guam. On the first day of the Guam landings, the Marines advanced so fast that Japanese commanders suspected faulty intelligence. They expected chaos, fatigue, fear of unfamiliar terrain, but instead heard tanks grinding forward, radios coordinating smoothly, mortars adjusting in seconds. Japanese soldiers realized Marine speed was not tactical. It was systemic. Marines did not wait for orders. They sought opportunities. They did not pause for support. They moved to guide fire. They did not reorganize behind the lines. They restructured while fighting. A Japanese officer later said, "Each Marine carried a small command post in his mind." Japan could not match this. Japanese training emphasized obedience, not initiative. At night on Guam, another horror emerged. Japanese troops heard rustling in the jungle and prepared for ambush, only to see American patrols moving with silent coordination under flare-lit skies. Marines communicated in whispers, repositioned fluidly, navigated darkness with discipline. Japanese soldiers were shocked to see Americans using night communication equipment and reacting in seconds to threats. Japan had relied on night attacks because they could not match American firepower by day. America used night operations to enlarge its advantage, not compensate for weakness. On the third day, a Japanese lieutenant at an observation post saw Marines establishing a frontline medical station. Nurses attending to a Marine with a stomach wound, plasma hanging from a stand, antibiotics and dressings ready. Wounded Americans were immediately treated, then evacuated to beach transports. A Japanese soldier murmured, "They even saved those who were dying." In the Imperial Army, wounded men were burdens. Light casualties fought. Severe casualties died alone. Survivors were often shamed. Americans pulled their wounded back from death and returned them to battle weeks later. Japanese soldiers realized wounded Americans were not losses. They were restored resources. Japanese wounded were simply gone. This created two different war equations. Every American casualty could return as combat power. Every Japanese casualty meant permanent degradation. American life had value. Japanese life had none. That was not a moral truth. It was a structural one. As Guam collapsed, Japanese defenses shattered like sandbanks under relentless waves. Many Japanese soldiers felt they were losing not on the battlefield, but in Japan's industrial foundations. For the first time, they felt destined to lose. Doubt in Bushido, once unthinkable, spread like a virus. Private Tetsuo Honda wrote, We never understood the American structure. We believed if we defeated their soldiers, we would win. But their soldiers are only fingers of a giant, and we are biting a single finger. He died before the battle ended. His diary became one of many similar documents collected afterward. Japan's high command finally called an extraordinary meeting. Intelligence officers were ordered to reevaluate the Marine Corps. Their reports stunned the room. Marine operations overwhelm us not only by firepower, but by coordination. They make in 1-minute decisions that take us 10. They turn local fights into systemic advances. Classified top secret. Its content was already obvious to frontline troops. As the Marines reorganized to attack the Philippines, Japanese soldiers understood they faced something beyond conventional warfare. America's force was not individual. It was national. Across Luzon, Mindanao, and Leyte, Japanese defenders witnessed standardized American power. Identical firepower, logistics, doctrine, and tempo replicated everywhere. It was not imitation. It was industrial standardization. Japanese troops realized they were fighting not a unit, but a scalable system. In the Philippines, terrain complexity offered no relief. Marine recon units could call naval gunfire from deep in the jungle. Aircraft relayed intel in minutes. Radio calls adjusted artillery across kilometers. Japanese soldiers were confused. How could battles shift direction in minutes? But Americans fought in a different time scale. Luzon defenders discovered Marines advanced like flexible steel, cutting gaps repeatedly. When Japanese expected pauses, they saw fresh Marines rotating in, replacing exhausted units seamlessly. Japan had no replacements. Fatigued soldiers fought until death. Captured soldiers in Luzon confessed, "We did not lose the tactics, but the speed. They are always ahead. We are always behind." Another said, "We tried to set ambushes, but they always arrived before we could." By Mindanao, Japanese troops believed their enemy was not human, but elemental. America was not a country. They saw it as a beast with endless limbs, eyes, skin, and breath. Marines were claws, air power eyes, the Navy skin, the economy bones. Japan struck barehanded at a city of steel. This belief hardened after the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The magnitude of the American landing forces, ships, aircraft, and continuous bombardment erased any fantasy of parity. Japanese defenders in the mountains did not first hear rifle fire. They heard naval guns shaking the earth and the endless overhead roar of American aircraft. The message was unmistakable. This was not a symmetrical war. Marines moved between naval strikes like parts of a single machine. Japanese troops entered a state of dread they had never known. There was no refuge, not in the jungle, not at night, not in the hills. Firepower was a net tightening around them. A diary found in the Philippines read, "We are not fighting humans. We are fighting a force that does not tire. They're like the tide. You can kill a wave, but you cannot stop the sea." Analysts noted it captured the collapse in morale perfectly. As the Philippines campaign ended, Japanese troops understood they were not fighting an army, but an industrial civilization, while they themselves were the remnants of an empire bled dry. Defensive lines collapsed not from tactical failure, but because soldiers no longer believed victory was possible. This truth spread to Okinawa. Troops dug trenches along Cadena's slopes with bleeding hands and broken tools. Humid air made their skin rot. They dug day and night, hearing the distant thunder of an assembling American fleet. They could not see it, but the vibrations across the sea carried an unmistakable warning. At dawn on April 1st, a coastal observer looked out and froze. The horizon, from end to end, was filled with ships. Not a fleet, a continent of floating steel, warships in rows. Troop transports stretching into the distance, thousands of aircraft overhead. It looked like the end of the world. When naval guns opened fire, the Japanese finally understood what it meant to face an enemy impossible to strike back against. They could not even see the Americans, only watched their own island disintegrating. Hours of bombardment shook the earth, like a living creature twisting beneath them. After 6 hours, Private Morishita wrote, "We cannot comprehend this fire. The world is collapsing." His pencil snapped from shaking hands. For days, the bombardment felt less like battle and more like pre-written defeat. Marines had not even landed, yet Japanese soldiers already knew resistance would be meaningless. 72 hours of bombardment unleashed more shells than Japan's fleet could produce in a year. Cave became graves waiting to be sealed. Phone lines were shredded, runners buried alive. Officers issued orders no one could hear. On April 1st, when Marines landed, Japanese defenders felt a vibration in the ground, the movement of tanks. Shermans drove across the beach like on a training field. Few Japanese anti-tank weapons survived. A soldier wrote, "Their fire killed us first. Their soldiers only came ashore to confirm it. Expected defensive massacres never happened. No banzai charges, no counterattacks, no beaten back waves of infantry. The beaches were taken almost without resistance. Marines doubted the quiet, suspecting a trap. But the truth was worse. The Japanese could not respond. Their weapons were destroyed, their morale buried before battle began. American forces brought tools the Japanese could not imagine: bulldozers, engineering vehicles, flamethrower tanks, demolition teams, mobile command posts. Roads were built within 2 days, allowing tanks and artillery to surge inland. To Japanese troops in the hills, it seemed like a steel city rolling toward them. Marines advanced irregularly, through jungles, ridges, darkness, moving like a coordinated pack. Japanese training preached spirit, not structure. Yet Okinawa proved Americans were hardened not by ideology, but by system. At night, Japanese scouts expected to find exhausted Marines resting. Instead, they saw machine gun nests built under floodlights, engineers repairing fortifications, scouts mapping terrain, and teams rehearsing night approaches. Lieutenant Hayata wrote, "They never grow tired." Night, once Japan's domain, now belonged to the enemy. When the Shuri line fell, Japanese soldiers saw the true terror of American medical and logistical systems. Wounded Marines were treated instantly by corpsmen, moved to battalion aid stations, transported to shipboard hospitals, operated with advanced technology, and returned to combat. Japanese troops watched soldiers who should have died stand again months later. For them, the wounded were burdens, abandoned to infection or suicide. This difference created two war equations. American losses were temporary. Japanese losses were permanent. America valued life. Japan consumed it. As Marines pushed south, flamethrower tanks approached cave networks. Burning fuel cascaded into tunnels like molten metal. Oxygen vanished. Men died without flame touching them. Corpses fused a stone. A corporal wrote, "It is not a weapon, it is a dragon." Marines cleared cave after cave with methodical destruction. Bushido promised honorable death in close combat, but flamethrower warfare offered no duel, no courage, only suffocating fire. An officer wrote before dying, "Bushido has no meaning here. The warrior age has ended." As the Japanese command retreated, despair eclipsed fear. They waited not to fight, but to die. Rumors from Iwo Jima, of Marines who fought until literally drained the blood, spread again, now unquestionably true. Night radios clicked calmly in English. Bulldozers roared. Engineers planted explosives. Marines advanced in teams rotating every few hours. Japanese men realized they were not fighting soldiers, but a machine made of flesh. Defenses that took months to build fell within hours. Confidence and spirit collapsed completely. No one survives when the Marines arrive, soldiers whispered. Not literally, but spiritually, it meant resistance had no meaning. A soldier wrote, "They do not stop, and we cannot stop them." In that moment, the collective psyche shattered. They finally understood defeat was inevitable before the Americans even landed. Driven into southern caves, they breathed mildew and death. Artillery shook dust from ceilings. Engineers sealed exits. Flamethrowers suffocated tunnels. Marine assault teams moved with perfect coordination. Japanese troops saw the Americans not as individuals, but as limbs of a single organism. Outside, logistics pulsed with life. Trucks unloading ammunition, tractors clearing debris, hospitals treating wounded, ships bringing fresh supplies. Japanese forces coughed blood, starved, and waited for the end. A private whispered, We cannot fight men who never weaken. After Okinawa, every soldier knew if America invaded the home islands, Japan had no capacity to resist. The Americans planned 500,000 troops for the first wave, supported by thousands of planes and hundreds of ships. Japan had only starving youths, elderly men, women with bamboo spears. This was not defense. It was ritual sacrifice. Only the atomic bombs prevented an invasion. In the occupation, Japanese veterans expected monsters. Instead, they saw calm, disciplined American youths, boys who fought in Iwo Jima and Okinawa, but now handed out food and smiled at children. They realized the enemy's strength was not brutality. It was a system that valued human life. Veterans admitted Japan had not lost due to cowardice, but because they fought the modern world with pre-modern ideas. Courage could not replace logistics. Spirit could not match industry. One Marine camp shocked a Japanese sergeant. Cold storage trucks, showers, fresh bread, coffee, chocolate, electric lights. He whispered, "We have not eaten in days, and they fight with full stomachs. Then they fight to live. We fight to die. Those who fight to live will always win." Japanese pilots realized in the Philippine Sea that they were not defeated by Hellcats. They were defeated by the American flight deck. Artisans built Japanese planes. Factories mass-produced American ones. And airmen said, "We were defeated by their system." On Okinawa, Marines fought with information. Maps, radios, observers, aircraft. Japanese soldiers fought in darkness. One wrote, "They fought with light, we fought blind." Recruits grew younger and weaker. Veterans wept recalling boys with mismatched uniforms and rusted rifles. They were sacrificed by their country, one said, when Americans entered Japan. Some Marines helped elderly civilians carry bags. Survivors cried seeing their faces. They were not demons, one said. They were boys. Japan finally understood America's terrifying strength was not military, but structural. Each Marine represented thousands of engineers, farmers, workers, doctors. Japan's soldiers represented a government that threw them into death with no support. The war's outcome was not decided in jungles, but in factories, schools, fields, supply lines. Japan tried to overcome industry with spirit. America showed that real spirit grows from strength, education, logistics, unity. A kamikaze survivor said, "We believed our deaths could change the war, but America replaced every ship we sank before our bodies hit the sea. Our lives could not buy even one of their screws." In old age, Japanese veterans concluded they had not been defeated by America, but by the modern age. Japan tried to fight an industrial superpower with a feudal ideology. The price was their lives. One dying veteran left a final message. "Never let a leader tell you that spirit alone overcomes the world. The world listens only to strength, knowledge, industry, unity. America was not our disaster. Our ignorance was." He closed his eyes, leaving a truth carried by all survivors. The Pacific War was not just military defeat, but the end of an era, a defeat of a worldview that believed spirit could overcome the future.